Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're excited you've joined us for today's session on how to tell the right story for your brand. A few housekeeping details before we get started. This session is being recorded, and you should receive a link to the recording tomorrow by email. Please feel free to share this webinar content with colleagues that could not attend today. A question and answer session will immediately follow the presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. You'll also see a link I pasted into the chat box there in your GoToWebinar panel. We're going to have a couple of videos interspersed within Sean's presentation, so save that link. Don't watch the videos yet, but when he cues you to go watch a video, that's the link you'll want to follow to watch them. Today's webinar is hosted and sponsored by Suttle-Straus. Suttle-Straus was founded in 1910. Over 100 years, our company has built up the equipment and expertise to handle almost any print project. We offer creative design services, web, sheet fed, and digital printing, wide format printing for signs and banners, direct and transactional mail, a print-on-demand technology for distributed networks, along with kitting and fulfillment. For more information on our services, please visit us on the web at Suttle-Straus.com. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Sean Mullen is a VP and Creative Director at Hiebing. Sean lives to inspire great work, ideas that surprise, engage, and differentiate, bringing great brand stories to life. He's been recognized by nearly every important communications annual and award show, and he's led the way in building Hiebing's sterling reputation for outstanding and effective creative work. Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can take it away.
Sounds good. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen. First of all, thanks to Suttle-Straus for giving me the opportunity to do this webinar today. Suttle-Straus is a great partner working with us with Culvers and Toppers and some of our other clients. And thanks to everyone that's taken the time to tune in today. As Megan said, I'm Sean Mullen, VP CD of Hiebing. For those of you that don't know, we're a full-service marketing branding agency here in Madison. We've been around for 35-ish years. They don't ask me to do math, so I'm not exactly sure if it's 35 or 36. There's approximately 100 of us between Madison, Wisconsin, and Austin, Texas, with the majority here in Madison, our original home. So let's talk about advancing the slides. There we go. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about why stories matter, and more so than ever before. Also going to talk a little bit about how do you tell your story, kind of the 4 key components to telling your story, and 6 things you shouldn't forget when telling your brand story. I'm going to share some work that we've done here at Hiebing that hopefully brings some of these ideas to life, spanning print, social, TV, radio, and digital. And as Megan mentioned, there is some video. I'll let you know the link to click and when to click it to make sure things run smoothly. I'll just leave my screen up while you guys are watching the video. And I'm not known for being great with time, so I usually go short or go long. I will try to keep things going along at the proper pace today. So why do stories matter more than ever before? Well, let's pause for a second because we just need to think about what's going on in society. And there's a lot. We're more connected than ever before. Social media, global streaming, and news and entertainment. How can we not be connected? It's hard to avoid. Things are personalized. We can get info and experience tailored just to us. And we don't need to work real hard at it. I mean, the algorithms do it for us, right? Whether that's shopping, communicating, getting our news, our entertainment, you name it. It's a visual world, more so every day. I'm a visual person. I like this one. Also, at the same time, people are optimistic. It may not seem that they are, but they're optimistic that technology can make life better. And the flip side of that, there's suspicion. What can you really believe anymore? And I'm not just talking about news and that sort of a thing, but there's technology out there that can replicate visuals, can replicate audio, and it's getting more confusing for people to separate reality from other things. And beyond that, or frankly, because of that, Plus the changes in technology and how we consume media, it's just leaving us with what experts are saying is the attention span of a goldfish. Now, has it really decreased from 12 minutes to 9 seconds, as the experts say these days? I'm not sure, but any decrease is pretty dramatic. And what do we got against goldfish? Maybe that's the attention span we should have. But the point is, whether it's 9 seconds, 8 seconds, whatever it is, we simply don't invest in as much time as we used to when it comes to observing marketing, especially. We just don't pay as much attention. So what do we do? Like I said, we can find out details about anything. I just was on a presentation at South by Southwest, and they talk about Gen Z and their expectations for immediate feedback, immediate conversation, driven by social media and the internet. Our attention spans have declined, as I just mentioned, and there is a note of skepticism in the air. So how do we break through? As marketers, how do we break through all these things that are going on? Well, what we believe here at Hiebing is a brand story, but not just any brand story, an authentic brand story. And this is important. Authenticity is important because as attention spans are getting smaller, we're fighting more and more for that little piece of attention out there in the marketplace. So we need to award those that do choose to get involved and invest in our brands and spend their money on products or experiences. So we need to be believable, and that's where authenticity comes in. Because grabbing their attention in a believable way, it's got to meaningfully differentiate. It's the single most important thing that we need to do as marketers. Or are we storytellers? I'd suggest that it's time to slightly reframe how we think about what we do. And that's where storytelling comes in and is so important. And history shows us that stories are the way people learn. So between history and the brain, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, it suggests that yes, storytelling is the key to getting people to pay attention and to believe in our brands, our products, and our services. Obviously, the art of storytelling goes all the way back to the Greeks. Aristotle talked about the elements of what he called convincing rhetoric, or storytelling, as pathos, logos, and ethos. Today, we call those empathy, logic, and trustworthiness. And I'll talk a little bit more about those soon. But it does go back all the way to the Greeks, but it goes back further than that. Stories truly are the foundation of interaction. Cave drawings are really our first indication of storytelling and our first examples of storytelling. Another thing about stories is that stories solve problems. They have the power to break down complicated ideas or communicate what are otherwise unrelatable ideas into things everyone can understand or relate to. But why is that? Well, what the science shows is that when people are just relaying facts, your brain starts to search for experience or opinions that relate to that fact. And we may not have any. But when those facts are wrapped into a story that contains emotion, that contains relatable anecdotes, we are, frankly, just able to relate much, much easier. So stories can solve problems. And in stories, we see ourselves. Mirror neurons. There's some discussion now about the validity of mirror neurons, but the concept is simple. The idea that when someone undertakes an action or does something or relays information, the neurons in the person receiving the information, the same neurons light up. For instance, they hooked up folks' brains. They were sharing a video that the Coast Guard had put together, and I think it was with Google. And in the moment in the video, when the helicopter landed to rescue some kids, there was a scene when one of the Coast Guard folks reached down, extended their hand to one of the children, and the neurons in the people watching the video in the same part of the brain that control the arm lit up as well. So literally and figuratively, an idea of we see ourselves in stories. It's happening in our brain. Stories are memorable. I'm sure everyone's seen this thrown around that stories are 20 times more memorable than facts and figures alone. It's kind of simple. There's only so much room for facts in our brains. It's easier to recall emotions. Why? Because they touch more areas of the brain. When you're processing or receiving a fact, it may be affecting one area. But when you're processing or receiving a narrative, a story that's got emotional elements to it, more areas of your brain come alive. Now, the whole 22 times, the people who did that study, much smarter than me. Is it really 22 times? Is it accurate? I'm not sure it matters. Even if stories are just 2 times more memorable, it'd be worth it to tell a story, correct? I think it would be. So just to sum that up a little bit, why do stories work? Well, there's just too much information coming at us to attempt to process it all. We look for patterns and categorize everything accordingly. So those stories, the things that affect more areas of our brain, they are recalled quicker. And then also stories kind of allow people a shorthand to decision making, which is what we want people to do, right? Make decisions to engage with our brands, their products, and their experiences. And then one other thing is that storytelling really marries an idea with an emotion. The idea, the information you want to convey, and then the emotion, how you do it, the narrative. And I think one thing here to remember is an emotion, when we say emotion, we're not really thinking about like touchy-feely. You know, we're not always talking about gooey emotions and love. Emotions are a range. Emotions can be everything from urgency, compassion, anger, fear, being able to relate. So those are all emotions. We're not just talking about making people feel good, although I would recommend that. And so let's get down to talking about what is a brand story. Well, you know, stories tend to unfold in individual tactics, right? Your brand story unfolds in individual tactics. Could be a direct mail piece, could be a TV commercial, could be your POP, but it really is a collection of every single thing you do. And the right story will reflect the truth of an organization's best self. So the right story for your brand isn't just going to appeal to your target, to your customers. It's going to appeal to those inside of your building as well. It's really kind of the breathing embodiment of your brand, and you need to carry it forward in everything you do. It is active. It's out there. It's the way your brand exists in the world, the sum of all those things. So what does that mean? Well, you need to remember that your brand story is being told, whether you're curating or not. You need to tell your story or others are going to fill in the gaps. Sure, there's always been kind of word of mouth recommendations. People have always talked about what they like and what they don't like when it comes to the brands they interact with. But technology really has obviously put the tools in the hands of customers like never before, and with the speed never before. So that level of amplification, the good and the bad, can be spread. And it's spread, like I just talked about, speed, quickly. So I'm going to share an example, just hold on for a second here, of Toppers. Toppers, the pizza chain. Toppers is known for being a bit rowdy and in your face, and that's a big part of their story. So this was the perfect example or the perfect opportunity to tell Toppers' story by co-opting what people were saying about the competition. So when the competition wasn't curating their story, we kind of took advantage of that. We went out on social media, we found what others are saying, and we created this radio commercial. And if you now go to your web link that is in the chat box and click on that, and if you go and listen to the first link, which is Toppers Jack, I'll give us about a minute, and then I will come back. So go ahead. All right, hopefully everyone had enough time to listen in. I gave a couple extra seconds for a download. So we talked about curating your story or others could do it. Here's an example of an opportunity to have someone else help curate our story, the Culver story. By understanding Jim Gaffigan's story, his love of food, a wife from Wisconsin, a fondness for Culvers, mentioned in his books, we knew he was in town and dropped off some Kirtner t-shirts from Culvers. The result, he graciously shared a picture of his kids wearing the shirts, and the People magazine online shared the image. And why did it work so well? Well, it was believable. It was an authentic interaction. It wasn't a brand just gratuitously trying to jump in the celebrity's world. It made sense, and it was authentic to him and to his fans. So how do you tell the right story? The one that's authentic? You know, what are the building blocks? What are the things you need to do to make sure your story is going to stand out? Well, number one, you need to uncover your story. I had mentioned Aristotle and ethos or empathy. Everything you're doing that's going to be relevant to your target market or your customers starts with empathy. And I want to emphasize, this is about your story. Don't go chasing someone else's. But even though it's your story to tell, you need to remember you're living in your customer's world. You need to understand where they're coming from and what's important to them. Seems intuitive, but you'd be surprised at how easy to kind of walk right by this. So putting in the time and the empathy. And empathy really comes from listening. It's way too easy and too common for brands to tell a story that's most obvious to them, right? We've put in the time, we've created a new product, we've created a new service, we've worked about it. We've worked on it, we've thought about it. We think we know why it's important to our customers. But when you listen, really listen, you may start to uncover the real motivations that your customer has and how your product or service fits into their life. Don't be afraid to ask. We call it why, like a child. Always go deeper. And oftentimes, there's not a big budget for research. So get creative if you have to. Go out on the street, talk to people, put things in your hands, ask them questions. But the takeaway here is make sure you're listening. Listen to your potential targets and your customers. And why? Because listening leads to insight. And when you've got it right, your insight is it's that human truth that your target is dealing with. Insights are often unstated motivations that potentially can make your story very relatable. Sometimes this is kind of the aha moment where you realize that there's this universal truth out there that's driving people to make some of the decisions they do, and oftentimes you can relate. And of course, if we do that right, the insight unlocks the emotional connection. And that's important because you need to connect emotionally. And like I said before, this doesn't always mean, ooey gooey and, making people feel good and love and that sort of a thing. There's lots of different emotions out there. And you're going to connect deeper when you connect emotionally. I mean, we're emotional beings. We try to be so rational, and oftentimes people will repeat what brands say that are rational, but it's the emotion that causes them to make the decision, then they use the facts to rationalize it. I mean, if we weren't emotional beings, would we really pay a premium for Starbucks when you can get a cup of coffee that tastes just as good for half? Your story is going to help fill in that gaps, help rationalize. And with your emotional connection, that helps us create a story strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about our process for our story strategy. So our story strategy tongue-tied there. Our story strategy consists of 5 questions, and we make sure that we answer these 5 questions in no longer than one type line. It's hard to do. It's hard to keep it focused because you want to add a lot in there when we're talking about our brands and our products and our services. But you need to focus. You need to focus in order so that your work stands out. We talk about our core target market. That's our first question, is what is driving your core target market in this moment? And we talk about them and we frame them from an emotional perspective. It's very easy to talk about our core target in demographics, age, sex, where they live, what kind of car they drive, that sort of thing. And that's great when you're planning media, and that's great for helping you find your target, but it certainly doesn't help you figure out how they're motivated. You could define me demographically. I'm a X-year-old dad with X number of kids who lives in X city, but I'm very differently motivated when I'm buying a fire alarm than when I'm buying a pair of shoes, for instance. So that's why we make sure that we define our core target in that first question emotionally. We ask, what does your brand live to do here and now? So your brand actually does something. It does something for your target. It's active. Volvo, you could say Volvo positioning is safety. We would say Volvo provides security in an unsafe world. It needs to be active. We ask, why should they believe us? So this kind of goes back to that insight. What's going on in their world that makes them believe us? And then we've got our BS meter. Why do they give a damn? It just checks us and makes sure that we're not talking to ourselves. We're talking to our core target as we define them and their motivation up above. And of course, what do we want them to do? You can assume that, yeah, we want them to buy or participate, but oftentimes it could be make first contact or question what they're doing already. So that's the first part, is uncovering your story. The second part is bringing it to life. And so you've uncovered your strategic foundation for your story, the story strategy. The core creative idea, well, that's a mark, a tagline, the perfect combination of words and images, tone and manner that your brand is going to use to express itself. That's what we call the core creative idea. It's the foundation and the framework from which your brand story unfolds. And there's three things that we think make for or talk about making for a great core creative idea. First of all, it illustrates. Is the idea simple enough, clear to the target? Do they understand what you're trying to tell them? Second, didn't work there, sorry about that. Second, it ignites. It really captures the target's interest and their passion. And it just doesn't capture their interest and their passion, it actually moves them to take an action. And then third, it iterates. That simply means is that the story is going to hold up across time and across touch points, because you're not going to be able to pack everything you want at every touch point for your brand. A 5-second web video is very different than a 60-second long form content piece. A POP at a drive-through is very different than a menu layout. So core creative idea, we'll talk a little bit about this some more. That's an example of what we call a core creative idea statement for Hyatt down outside of Austin, Texas. Hyatt Lost Pines is in Bastrop County. It's beautiful. It's removed from the hustle and bustle and the traffic that is Austin itself. And our core creative idea we came up for the Hyatt Lost Pines was lost is found. You have to escape from the crazy in order to get lost in the things that mattered all along. Lost in the moment, lost in love, lost in laughter, lost in thought. So it seems like a simple statement, but there's a lot packed in there. So when it comes time to execute, we need to kind of unbundle some of that stuff. A print ad, a place like no other for a love like no other. Hyatt Regency, 405 scenic acres, 12 magical venues, all yours. So expression of lost is found. The idea of finding what you want in this place that you can make your own. Get lost from everything else, get lost from what everyone else is doing, and make it your own. And then expanding that core creative idea into generating content online. Part of Hyatt's offering down there, obviously, based on the ad, is a pretty robust program for weddings. So expanding Lost is Found into Lost in Love and creating content around planning weddings in Texas and their property, and then keeping that content fresh. So extending the idea of how, if you go to Hyatt Lost Pines, you can get lost in love, serving up content. One thing to remember when creating your core creative idea is that marketers, we've kind of historically had two paths. And I think, unfortunately, most people think that what we do is on the left, and that's kind of creating a smoke screen around a product, making things up, stretching things. Well, we talk about illuminating the truth. And what that is finding the truth in your product and how that's relevant to your target market. So whenever we need to illuminate the truth, get to the core of what is going to be relevant for your target. And this is important. We talked especially about skeptics and things that are going on, but it's a reflection of the trustworthiness or the credibility of the brand. Your audience wants to believe, but they're still going to question everything. They don't have a choice. There's a lot of skepticism out there, things that are going on. They've been burnt before. So one thing to think about is, does your core creative idea and the way it comes to life, does it meet these three things? It needs to, or it's not going to be effective. Is it relevant? Did you uncover the right story? Did you listen? Is it relevant to the people that you want it to be relevant to? Or is it just relevant to an internal audience? Because if it's just relevant to the internal audience, everyone feels good about it, it may not help move things forward. Is it true? This is where we talk about being believable and authentic. The last thing you want to do is put communication out there or marketing out there that leads someone to participate in your brand, and they have an experience that, frankly, does not meet up to that messaging you put out there. One thing about this is it can be aspirational. It just can't be impossible. And then, is it differentiated? Is the combination of words, images, and sounds, the way you're bringing your core creative idea to life, is it unique in some way that it's going to break out from the category or whatever else you need to break out from? I'm going to share a cause marketing idea here that I think hits on all three of these. So many brands are into cause marketing right now, and it makes sense because all the research shows that people tend to support brands that support things they feel very strongly about. That's kind of one of the cool things that's going on right now. But do the causes always align with the brand story? Are they relevant, true, and differentiated? We've seen some interesting brands, and it's wonderful because there's so many great causes out there. But when talking about Culver's and their Thank You Farmers project, it was relevant, true, and believable, because preserving the future of the food supply, that is a very authentic message and an important message to Culver's, a restaurant brand with its roots in a small town in an agricultural state. It's a natural fit for cause, it's authentic. So you didn't need to spend a lot of time convincing customers that it's important to Culver's. So it's easier to buy in. You're giving them less cognitive load, as the neuroscientists would say, which is a fancy word for you don't have to make them think a lot. So our first thing was uncovering your story. Second, bringing it to life with a core creative idea. The third, give them something to believe. We talked about the skepticism out there, the things that are going on. You need to deliver the right amount of specificity with your marketing. The modern folks, as we talked earlier, people want to be believers, but there's a lot of skepticism out there. Your best bet to breaking through is give them something to believe, something they can use to rationalize what they're probably already feeling. Remember, we talked about this idea of being emotional beings. We think we make decisions for very rational reasons. We make the decisions for emotional reasons, and then we rationalize them. Here's just a little work. We work with Doctors Without Borders, MSF as it's known around the world. And MSF, our Doctors Without Borders, provides assistance to populations in distress, to victims of natural or man-made disasters, and to victims of armed conflict. They do it apolitically. It's a great organization. They understand the power of when you're asking someone to give money, of being specific, talking about what they do. They do things, they go places others don't. So we can talk about that, whether that's literally pulling refugees to safety, performing surgery in a war zone, or providing services such as the HIV positive man and the image on the right. We have very specific things we can talk about. Talking about those, giving people rational reasons helps. These are stories they can then share when people ask, hey, have you ever gave to Doctors Without Borders? Did you know they're doing X, Y, and Z? And the fourth thing, make it easy. Be consistent with your messaging. This goes back to that big word, cognitive load. People don't have a lot. You need to give them shortcuts to know that it's your brand that's talking to them. And there's a reason that the great brands don't have new campaigns each year. You got to remember your story is going to build over time, but only if you tell the same story. It's also the best way to make sure your dollar you spend goes further. If your messaging is consistent, every time you go out there with something, it's going to build on what was previously there. So literally makes your dollars go further. At the same time, you need to strike the right consistent balance. Too little consistency, there's no believability. It's just one claim after another. It's one new campaign after another. Too much, and the consumer loses interest. So our brains seek novelty over time because it cares less and less about things it seems before. Everything goes back to the cave days, and the things that you hadn't seen before were the things that could probably eat and kill you. So those are the things you pay a little more attention to. So I'm going to share in a second a commercial that was near the start of the Culver's Welcome to Delicious campaign called Midwest Raised Beef. So if you want to click on the link called Midwest Raised Beef, go right ahead. Okay. Hopefully I gave you guys enough time to watch the full 30 seconds. But that was early on in the campaign, talking about fresh, never frozen beef, how it's prepared. I'm now going to share the latest commercial, which ran in the fall and I believe is running again very soon, called Behind Every Butterburger. You'll notice we're talking about similar themes. We're talking about why Culver's does things the way they do, but presented in a very fresh and different way. So go ahead and pick Behind Every Butterburger from the web link, and I'll give you guys 30-some seconds. Okay, hopefully that was enough time. You can go back and watch the link later if you need to. But hopefully you notice some of the same things going on, the same messaging, but presented in a very different way. We actually surprise people and let them come back and see a Butterburger being made for them, which is the way it's done, and then letting them enjoy one. All right, so we talked a little bit about uncovering your story, using a core creative idea to bring it to life, giving the right amount of specificity so folks have something to believe in your story, and then making it easy for folks to see your story and build on your story by keeping it consistent. Now I'd love to share 6 things that I think you should never forget when telling your story and getting your story out there in the world. So number 1, no one is sitting around waiting to hear your story. Every one of us woke up this morning thinking about our brands, thinking about our jobs and the things we do. But I guarantee very few other people did. So you need to understand when and where they may be interested in your particular story. Do you understand their daily journey enough to know when it can have the most impact? And one thing to think about is that when and where is not just a place either, it can be a mindset. We knew a couple years back the Packers were playing the Seattle Seahawks, and a lot of our target was invested in kind of following the championship game. They were very invested in the news cycle that was going around the game. And a story broke that I think it was the mayor of Bainbridge had banned Wisconsin cheese from the town because of the rivalry with the Seahawks. Well, we thought that was an opportunity to share the rebellious nature of the Toppers brand. So I'm going to click off. This will be the legalized cheese link. Basically what we did is we staged a fake arrest. We pretended, because once again, part of Culver Topper's story is about rebellious and being rowdy. We did a fake arrest of one of our drivers trying to deliver a Topper's pizza covered with real Wisconsin cheese to Bainbridge. So go ahead and click on this video. I forget how long this one is, so I may give you an extra minute. So please hang on if you're sitting there for some dead air. Go right ahead. All right, hopefully that was long enough where you were able to watch the video. But just to sum up, by understanding what was going on in our target market's mind, understanding what they were paying attention to, we were able to have some fun and end up getting mentions on BuzzFeed and Good Morning America before the Super Bowl, or before the NFC Championship. Number two thing to never forget is that you're going to get sick of your story long before your audience does. As marketers, strategists, creative folks, account people, we put a lot of thought and time into creating and executing our story across tactics. And it's all done long before anyone sees it. So it's very easy to want to move on when it comes to what's next. I remember, even if you've brilliantly planned your tactics and the media, the number of times your customer comes in contact with your story will be minimal compared to you. You'll be tempted to change for the sake of changing, and that is not necessarily a good thing. This next example is some packaging that's currently in Culver's that we worked with Culver's on and their great marketing group there. And a couple things you may not notice, but I noticed, is we've got quotes from their television campaign. We've got familiar language that's used inside, outside the restaurant, and digital properties. You know, by the time a television commercial gets out there, we as marketers have seen it 100 times. It would be very easy to walk away with familiar language and to not build on those things. But we need to take advantage of that consistency. As we talked before, it's just a great way to make your dollars go even further. Next thing to remember is that your story will not necessarily be for everyone. It's very easy to say that everyone could use our product, but remember, anything that's for anyone rarely stands out. You need to have a center you're aiming for. You'll get the people outside of that center, but you need to focus. And this goes back to listening and understanding that insight and knowing who and how is going to be most motivated by your target. If you try to talk to everyone, you're not going to get them. These examples are from some toppers, male pieces. You'll notice something about toppers. It's a little bit in your face. It's a little bit rowdy. Not everyone is going to enjoy online ordering so easy you'll be insta-face snapping your pizza in no time, or get it, and that's okay. Anyone can order from the big chains, but you're not just anyone. So Toppers understands that their story is not for everyone. They can be rowdy, they can mix things up, they can talk a little bit differently, and they can behave a little bit differently. Next, different mediums, same story. So we talked a little bit before about if you're doing a 5-10 second online video versus a 30-second commercial. How do you portray the same thing? I'm going to share another Toppers example. They're known for being rowdy. They're known for interesting and unusual, high-quality toppings on their pizza. They had a new pizza, a cheeseburger pizza, that they wanted to introduce. So how do you do that in a couple seconds? Go ahead, and if you want to click in your web link, if you go to Toppers Magic, go ahead and watch the video. That's a quick one, so I'm guessing that's played already, and it may play just fine here. But once again, in a matter of a couple seconds, demonstrating Toppers' never settle attitude, telling their story about interesting and unusual pizza toppings quickly. The next thing never to forget is that your story is alive. It's going to grow. It's going to breathe. It's going to evolve. Listen to your customers. Remember, evolution, not revolution. So many brands, as I talked earlier, move on from one thing to the next. Customers just do not have the space to continually try to keep up, to relearn and reinvest in your message. And evolution, as I said before, kind of ensures your dollars go farther. Building on the recent past is more efficient than rebuilding. This next image is from Ceres, Cyclops, the brand. They make some of the best indoor bicycle training equipment in the country. And they also work with online interactive immersive bicycle training. Ruvi is one of them. And this was an ad making sure people knew that you could hook up to your bicycle trainer, that's the little black triangle in the back, to the program. And the concept was that instead of sitting in your basement or your apartment or your house and just staring at the wall or staring at the TV, we could kind of really bring the outside through video and through technology and a computer, through Ruvi, virtual training program, we could kind of bring that outside feeling in and reduce that feeling of being stuck in a basement. So that was year one. A couple years later, same idea, but notice how the visual has evolved. Same concept, the idea that with a Cyclops trainer, with virtual interactive training and video that hooks up to your Cyclops trainer, the idea of merging that feeling of being outside with actually being inside. The difference here is it isn't a woman inside and the outside is coming in. It's a woman outside and her training is blending with the outside. So similar idea, but an evolution of that idea. And then last, but certainly not least, the thing to remember is that everything speaks. There's a difference there's a reason that Walt Disney has grown and is the amazing company it is versus, for instance, other theme parks such as Six Flags. Yes, you can say they've got movies and all the other media stuff, but really Walt Disney pays attention to every detail. You've heard all the stories of the incredible branded things they do, the way they take care of their guests. Apple versus Microsoft. Apple understood earlier that the feel of technology in your hands, such as the iPod or the iPhone, made a difference. Everything speaks. Southwest versus United. Southwest understood early that everything speaks, whether it was making for a more interesting safety presentation or the way they presented their promotions. Definitely paying attention. And then GE versus Westinghouse. GE doing a great job of understanding everything they do speaks and talks about innovation and imagination. So here's a sample. Culver's. Because we work in Culver's, obviously. But Culver's, this is wall art that you may see in your local Culver's. And Culver's understands that everything speaks. So making sure or taking opportunities so that when you're in a Culver's, you're dining, whether it's the wall art, messaging on the walls, making sure that the messages of the brand about fresh frozen custard, Wisconsin cheese, bacon on their burgers, the art on the walls are part of the brand. It's part of your brand story. So paying attention to little details like that demonstrates everything speaks. And then last but certainly not least is that the thing to remember is that relationships are not built on one dramatic action. You see a Culver's commercial, you go in the restaurant, you eat, you're surrounded by that wall art. It all should build. That story should come together and should build on itself. So we have to make sure that we're factoring in every cue. We don't want to interrupt the flow of your target's experience. The little details are a big deal, and being aware of those details is not. We have to continue to build and build. So those are the 6 things not to forget. Different mediums, different stories, everything speaks. You'll get sick of your story long before your audience does. No one's sitting around waiting to hear your story. Your story will not be for everyone. We call that the art of sacrifice. And your story, it's alive, it will grow and evolve. So with that, I want to say thank you and then hopefully answer questions you guys may have.
Great.
And
Thanks,
I think
Sean,
I hit my 45 minutes.
Yeah, about right on. So thanks for that informative presentation. We will now open it up for questions. If you have a question for Sean, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. While everyone's submitting questions, I wanted to remind you that this webinar has been hosted and sponsored by Suttle-Straus. If you're looking for a trusted vendor to help guide you through your next print or mailing project, please consider us and request a quote at Suttle-Straus.com. So Arona has a question here. She says, you say stories solve problems. You are showing graphics that take the place of words. How big a part do visuals play in telling stories? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Visuals are becoming more and more important for storytelling. 2 reasons. Nowadays, so many of our stories are crossing cultural boundaries and other things because of technology. Pictures are a shortcut when it comes to communicating across those sorts of traditional barriers. And then it goes back to the idea of our short attention span. I hate to talk so much about the brain, but everything I learn, everything I hear, everything I'm reading nowadays and experiencing and experimenting with goes back to how we process things. We simply process pictures faster and we tend to retain them better. I think comes from our core of being more of a visual versus a verbal and a written species, frankly. I don't mean to sound like a National Geographic person, but that's why it's important.
Great. A couple examples you mentioned, Craig Culver or Walt Disney. How much of a brand story comes from, I guess, its founder versus can a company have a shared story across multiple people?
That is a great question. You know, Walt Disney, for instance, he was such a pioneer in what he did with animation, and the company really grew out of that. So it would be hard to separate Disney and his vision and his story from that. Craig Culver also, you know, his dream of bringing the Butterburger and fresh frozen custard. With Culver's, for instance, the story was always there. We were just lucky enough to work with Culver's to have the opportunity to share it. But as far as, I think it comes down to, you know, your positioning, what you're there to do for your target market, and having a collective vision around that. You know, there's plenty of companies we work with that do not have that sort of Walt Disney person there, or CEO, or the founder that is still around. So if you've got the proper positioning and a mission, it's very easy to do. And like I said, the proper story, what I've experienced, gets the audience inside your building, inside your brand. When it's right, it gets them just excited and helps them go in the same direction as it does for your target.
Great. Paula asks a good question. A lot of the examples shown here are companies selling products, but what if you're in a service-based business? She said, my business is by online and on the phone. Any tips for using this advice without a physical store or an edible product?
Well, it's funny, we talked a lot of edible products over lunch. Sorry about that. Hopefully you guys all ate. I think if you talk about like I think in the healthcare space, you know, Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, that's different than an online retailer, but they do a good job telling their story through service. If you think about Moose Jaw, I don't know if you guys ever go to Moose Jaw. I think it's moosejaw.com. Hopefully they still have the same URL. I don't want to send you guys somewhere weird. They're an online retailer that does have bricks and mortar, but their story and the way they present stuff is a bit tongue-in-cheek. They've got a sense of humor about what they do. So they really, I talk about everything speaks, whether it's the receipt you get, whether it's the invoice, whether it's the shipping notice you get from them when you've ordered a product from them, because like I said, I've never been to their store. They make sure that every little detail kind of aligns with their sense of humor and their approach to the world. So what I would recommend is making sure that all those things that people are going to touch, because they're not going to a physical location, even if it's the 404 misdirection page on your site, make sure that you look for ways to embed your personality and your story into those things. They seem small, but they will add up.
Yeah, I'd say go check out the Hiebing website as well. You can definitely, you guys are selling services, obviously, but the way you speak about yourself is unique. I've seen lots of examples where, you know, the UX of a website, the user experience tells a lot about the company. They're kind of, you know, inside jokes. And Mitch asks, how do you approach global scope compared to the U.S. specific examples when building a brand?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're in the process right now of, we work with a company out of Colombia, and we were working with a company out of London last year. We were looking to translate and bring some of their products, which are not live right now, so I can't talk about them, basically bring them to the U.S. And in that case, it was a rebranding effort, because I think we knew that the story that they were being told down there, that space that they were in is very crowded in our market. So I would say going back to learning, positioning, and listening, understanding what they could offer, aligning that up with what we knew about the market they wanted to enter here, hopefully allowed us to close that gap. But I probably won't be able to tell you that for a year or so, if it worked.
And What are the signs that a brand story is working or not working?
Obviously sales, engagement, whether it's a service or a product. But as a creative director, I think one of the things I've noticed using social monitoring, when people are starting to use the language that you use to talk about your brand, when they're repeating it back to you, or you hear them or see them, or you get anecdotal evidence of them sharing the same language and talking about the brand the way you're talking about them, I think that's the biggest indicator, because that means you found something that's relevant, differentiated, and true, and people are repeating it. It's their rationalization. And that's pretty exciting, actually. Of course, the sales are exciting, but that's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. And Brendan wanted to know, can you comment on the difference in marketing a service to, let's say, the government versus a consumer? I guess we could apply that to all business to business. Do you have to talk differently than if you're talking one-to-one?
You know, it's interesting. I came from a past life where we were more B2B. At Hiebing, we are pretty, I'd say, 70% B2C, 30% B2B. We kind of have a philosophy is that it's businesses don't make decisions, people do. Yes, when you're doing B2B, you want to be more rational. That's what people default to. You still can be rational, but you've got to wrap it in a story, because at the end of the day, people are making decisions. You know, the government, obviously, when you're dealing with the government, selling services to the government, there are a different set of hurdles. But at the end of the day, you still have to tell a story, because the government isn't going to make a decision. People are going to make those decisions.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. If you think of a question later and you want to ask, you can email them to me at marketing@Suttle-Straus.com, and I can get back to you or connect you to Sean. Everyone, watch your email tomorrow for a link to the recorded presentation. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.